I'll go through some of the things that you asked about how Trump actually got to 312 electoral votes.
There's just a lot more potential when you're thinking about how do I get my message out there? It doesn't all have to be paid ads.
What's important is for listeners, what they can do is make sure that we are growing the Patriot economy and stopping spending our money with people who hate us.
Hello, and welcome to the Liberty Spenders podcast. We are Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, your hosts and co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's raised over $500 million and helped elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question: what if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into an engaged and lucrative audience we call Liberty Spenders? Now, those folks are politically conservative or faith-based consumers, and they're looking to buy from businesses and brands that align with their values. And we are really excited today because we're doing a bonus episode about the recent election, and have a good friend with us here today.
Yes, and there's not much to say. The easiest way to say Chris Wilson is the leading pollster and strongest data guy on the Republican side of the aisle. I'm trying to remember this morning when it was the first campaign that we would have worked with you, Chris. It's probably been a decade.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to think back that far. It's I think it may go back further than that, Kurt. But yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, it's been a while.
I remember first meeting him because you loomed so large, and you still do. But I was working for David McIntosh's governor's race of 2004, so I think it would have been in 03 maybe. So it's been 20 years.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think, that's a great example of politics, how, Kristen, where it's probably better for America that you guys lost that race. And it's stunning to say something like that. But now he is doing an amazing job running the Club for Growth and really focused on Indiana. Look what he was able to do there in your state with Jim Banks this cycle. Really avoid a primary or a general by getting involved early. The club has become a dominant force in American politics. And you were there to help launch David's career by working for him in that 2004 race.
Yeah. I really helped launch his career. Yeah, I'm going to send him a note to this afterwards, Chris, and we'll see. Although he was kind enough, he did write a little blurb for our new book that just launched, and so I appreciated that. But yeah, he is a wonderful leader and champion for freedom across the country. So definitely agree with that. But
yeah, but I'll tell you what, we have talked to so many people post-election here in November. And even political professionals like mine, I had been telling people for weeks, don't wait up on election night. This thing is going to go for a week. We might be counting votes into the following week. It's going to be close. Whoever wins is going to be the hair of their chinny chin chin. And here we are.
You tell Kurt has small kids.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's true. We have him on record here saying that, recording a different episode. And he's like, this won't be a landslide. It's going to be close. And And so many people there's been so much post-election speculation. What should we learn? What really happened? What was turnout like? Which audiences really switched sides? And I thought we would do the world some good to get somebody on the horn who can answer those questions with facts and, as we learned, 20 plus years of experience. And so we'd love to just do that for the next 30, 45 minutes, dig into this big Trump victory and what we learned. And we'll let this conversation meander. But I thought we'd start with, what do you think is the biggest lesson from this victory last week? What's the biggest thing we've learned?
Well, I'll start kind of responding to what you said earlier in terms of landslide versus being a close race, because I think most people agree with you, Kurt. You weren't on an island expecting it to be close. And anybody that is an intellectually derived, informed decision that it would be close. And candidly, I would have been there too, had I not been getting the data that the Trump campaign was seeing from a mutual friend of ours, Kurt, Brad Parscale. And Brad was doing something different than what is traditional polling, in which he was scraping online conversations. And he sent me, I spoke at Princeton University's political science department, along with the head of the Analyst Institute and the head of Edison Institute. For any of your listeners probably aren't familiar, Analyst Institute is this left-wing data analytics operation. Christina Colero runs it. A very, very smart group of people. Agree with them on math and absolutely nothing else. And then Edison are the ones who do the exit polling. And they both thought it was going to be close as well. And so to kind of, because Brad had sent me his numbers that morning that showed them leading in all of the swing states, I went out on a limb and said, I don't think it's going to be close. I think it'll be called an election night. And this is just pure luck. I did not share that opinion. I would have had your opinion if not for that morning when I landed and had some time as they were taking me over to my talk at Princeton. And I was looking through all his numbers. And it is, I think what we have seen in 2024 is a shift, not just in politics. And I'll talk about that in a second, because I know that's what your listeners are interested in, but a shift in the way that we measure politics. And I said this also at Princeton, and I'll say it today. I think we have seen the end of polling. And I say this as a guy who started what is now the largest polling analytics company in politics, a shift in the end of polling for the purposes of just measuring opinion. Because what Brad was doing is nationally, he was getting over 1 million conversations scraped from everything from TikTok to Twitter to Facebook to Nextdoor to Reddit to YouTube comments, and using artificial intelligence to summarize all that. And what that also means for your corporate clients is that doesn't just work in politics. It also works for any company out there. And I think, Kurt, I started what is now known as Patriot Mobile. And it is a cell phone company for the Liberty universe, Liberty audience. And it is really blown up, and it's run now by a guy named Glenn Story, and he's done a phenomenal job. But the ability to measure online conversation and know whether or not the ads they have now on Fox News are working, and what people are saying about it, what that means we should tell them more of and maybe tell them less of, and how that amalgamates on a state by state or MSA by MSA area for purposes of making future decisions on buying is really game changing. And I don't know that I saw artificial intelligence used by anybody else in politics at that level. And the beneficiary of that was the Trump campaign, because they were getting it. And, Brad was there at Mar-a-Lago, and he was showing the numbers to Don Jr. and those that were around him, and they were making their way on to the president. And they knew what was going to happen. Whereas our polling was sort of, it was kind of lagging behind. It was showing what was happening. Everyone knows polling's a snapshot in time. It was showing what was happening then. But this scraping of online conversations was showing what was going to happen. And it really kind of gave me an edge in terms of making some predictions that I don't know I believed when I said them. But I'm like, yeah, if I'm wrong, then everyone says, oh, well, it's just he said it for person. Or Brian, I look like I'm brilliant. So it's one of those times where it's better to be lucky than brilliant. But I'll go through some of the things that you asked about how Trump actually got to 312 electoral votes. And I'll go through some key points. And if you want to drill down on any of them, we can. So the first one is, I would say, the shift among white voters, and specifically the white working class. And we can talk about how that manifested itself from changes under when Obama ran in 2008 and 12, how it changed even from 2016. But really places like Waukesha, Wisconsin, Carmel, Indiana, right there where you guys are, Overland Park, Kansas, Westerville, Ohio. I mean, there were big shifts in these areas that were traditionally Democrat areas moving back to Trump. And meanwhile, you had diverse suburbs like Somerset County, New Jersey, DuPage County, Illinois, Collin County, Fort Bend County, even Fort Worth, Tarrant County in Texas that really shifted and sort of moved toward Democrats and shifted back. And I think that's a big deal. And it was really, it was with the working class voters. Second, and I'll be much briefer on the rest of these, GOP gains with Hispanic voters was a big deal. I'll just point to the Valley region, the border region in Texas, where Donald Trump won areas that won a county that was 97% Hispanic. Mixed results with black voters, where Republicans traditionally had gotten single digits with African Americans, and Donald Trump did very well with African American men. GOP shifts with Jewish and Muslim voters, interestingly enough, so maybe he can actually create peace in the Middle East again, like we had when he was there first time. But that's why he won Michigan. And it's you look at what's going on. If they ever finish counting the votes out in California, you have and happen in New York, areas that are heavily Jewish populations that shifted toward Trump. A pro-GOP shift with Asian voters, and that was the last one. So I think those are the key, the Donald Trump coalition, and almost all of those go into that first point, though, and I made it about white working class, but it was Hispanic working class, Asian working class, and really a shift in the fundamental makeup of which party represents what group of people. And it was amazing to watch.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting, and I'll let you, I know Kurt wants to jump in here too, but you mentioned Carmel, Indiana. And I mean, we were at the election victory party for Governor-elect Braun here in Indiana. And of course, everyone there was excited because Karl Rove mentioned it, right, on his commentary of I'm watching Carmel, Indiana, because he's trying to see how these suburban women, and what that's going to look like. So we know that a lot of people were looking, especially to see how women would respond. And it is interesting to your point about the coalition. I mean, I think that's what's been the most shocking to the Democrat Party and the commentators, I suppose, is just what does that coalition now look like? What does that mean for them moving forward? Because of course they have relied heavily on these groups to support them.
Yeah. I think some of what you pointed out, we saw in 2016, right? The big divide, if I remember correctly, is in 2016, we saw college educated whites and non-college educated whites diverge dramatically. And Trump was bringing these working class folks into the party in a way we didn't expect. And then I think in 22,
by nominating a billionaire, you get the working class voter. It's got
right,
exactly
right. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. We talk about this even again in our book in the principles, which is just positioning and messaging, because I mean, Trump was such a master of that, because who would have thought he would connect to those people with his backstory, and that he would be able to say, hey, these people are taking advantage of you and the system's rigged because I use it.
That's right.
It's just a classic example of not letting people judge a book by its cover and resonating your message that appeals to where people are.
Yeah. And I think we saw some of the Hispanic changes happening when we won some border. We started winning some border mayoral races down in Texas. Do you think that we're seeing there's one answer to that? Well, this is just an aberration. They didn't like Harris. The Democrats went a little too woke. Everything's going to return back to normal for 2026 or 28 when the factors change? Or do you think we're seeing something that's going to be endemic of how the parties are different in the upcoming elections?
If it was just in one area, like for instance, let's say it was just on the border, I would say, oh, it's endemic because it's immigration. I think every time Democrats use the term Latinx, we get another couple percent of the Hispanic vote. But this was a national phenomenon, Kurt. Trump won Hispanic men nationally. It's a major shift that transformed places like Miami-Dade County, where Clinton won by 30 points in 2016, into a plus 13 Trump county this year. He flipped Texas counties, like I said, Webb, Hidalgo, Cameron, and the Rio Grande Valley, as well as traditionally Democratic counties in California's Central Valley and Inland Empire. Even Hispanic communities in northern urban areas like New York City and Chicago showed increased support for Trump. And I think these shifts suggest that Hispanic voters are not just moving, but have really solidified their position within the GOP's coalition. And on their way, I think in 26 and 28, we will see Hispanic men and Hispanics in families as being a crucial voting bloc for all national elections moving forward, that we will say, all right, as we put together our target groups and think about back whenever you guys were running Prosper every day and thinking about, all right, who do we go to here? Who do we go to there? You would actually, there were programs that Republican campaigns and firms would use and say, hey, look, let's remove the Hispanics from the list because they won't respond well. And I know you guys didn't do that, but there are a lot of firms that did. And that's, I mean, you think about that, and now they are, not only will we not be removing them, but we're trying to find additional ones and appealing to them in different ways and trying to find other ways to make sure we get them out to vote, increasing registration drives in Hispanic areas. And think about how different that is from just a couple of years ago, short years ago.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that argument had been made for so long, from the argument of social issues and saying, hey, they want intact families and they're, faith driven. And there's a lot of those traditional values that are, valued in that community. And that was kind of the drumbeat for so long with a lot of Republicans that wanted to do more recruitment. And then that sort of got lost or abandoned at some part. Yeah.
Well, and we kept doing it, Kristen, but the beauty of it wasn't our recruitment that pulled them in. It was the Democrats pushing them out through their woke agenda. Again, Latinx, boys and girls sports, boys and girls bathrooms. I mean, it's just, at some point, you had the Hispanic community sit back and say, hold on, what in the world are you guys doing as Democrats that actually represents anything that we care about? And that's all it took. The Democrats, I'd love to say that we did something brilliant and pulled them in, and maybe some of Trump's rhetoric on immigration did that. But really, when it gets down to it, the Democrats chased them out.
I think that's you're so right about that. I'm so glad you piped in and corrected that, because that is true. And I think you're 100% right.
Yeah. And so I'll jump to one of my last questions. I was thinking, if maybe this is distasteful, but put your head into you're a Democratic pollster and a Democratic strategist, and they're coming to you saying, we need to win this next one. What do we do differently? What is it that they need to change if they want to win races?
You sure you want to even give them any hints? Yeah. I mean, let's not. I'm kidding.
Well, I think the first thing that they've got to do is recognize that abortion did not give them a boost. And even when you look at places where they put abortion on the ballot, they still lost. And in fact, Trump won 40% according to exit polls of people who voted for pro-abortion measures and still jumped over and voted for him. Now, you could make an argument, and I think it is an argument that is arguable, that may have saved them Senate seats in Arizona or Michigan or potentially Nevada and Wisconsin. But having said that, I think we're seeing that the country is experiencing a growing racial depolarization. And that is a real problem for Democrats, because if they can't keep the races polarized, then they can't continue to get the sort of high watermarks that Obama received, 95% with blacks, 70% with Hispanics, 68% with Hispanics. And so when they see those numbers come down, they've got to sit back and ask themselves, what is it that's causing this? Now, in theory, that's what you should want, right? You want the country to be racially depolarized, but that is the exact opposite of what the Democrats have created. You're right, Krista. I don't want to give them any hints, because I think when it gets down to it, but there are some other aspects. Harris's loss is consistent with an anti-incumbent theme we've seen around the world. You think about Mealy in Argentina. You think about the recent elections in the UK. I'm trying to think about other areas where we've seen this, but it's been pretty consistent around the world that you've seen incumbents lose over and over again. And I think a lot of that stems from lingering effects of COVID-19. I think voters really hate inflation. And so maybe Democrats should think about supporting policies that don't increase inflation. I think Biden was clearly an albatross around Harris's campaign, but I also think them just giving the nomination over to Kamala Harris without any sort of a primary was a real problem for them. And so maybe you should have a primary and not just give somebody the nomination without getting a single vote, and particularly somebody who dropped out early because she was such a horrible candidate in 2020. So, I mean, these are fundamentally simple answers, and I don't mean to go all Occam's razor on you, but it's, these are fair. What's the simplest explanation? It's probably the right one.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. I have been watching CNN and other places where Democrat commentators get on. They haven't learned anything yet.
I
haven't heard a single explanation from a Democratic operative in this country.
We must all be racist
with some sort of racism explanation,
including the African American men and Hispanics that voted for Trump. They're all racist too. It's just explains it all away.
Any reaction to policy or the quality of the candidate.
I'll start getting freaked out as a Republican trying to elect more Republicans when I start hearing Democratic commentators go a 30 to 60 second clip without mentioning racism, sexism, or misogyny. Then we'll know they finally gotten the joke. But they haven't yet. They're almost tripling down on it, which is, I find, shocking. But it is what it is. I saw this even in some of our statewide races. Obviously, we worked together on Ted Cruz. Mike Braun in Indiana was one that we were on. And those races also seemed awfully close. The Cruz race, if you were to read only the public polling, you would have thought was going to be closer than his race 6 years ago, which was close.
Yeah.
And Braun, the Democrats actually spent $2 million in Indiana thinking they had a chance against Mike Braun. And instead we get a 9 point, I think we're 9+ point Cruz victory and almost 13 points for Braun. So I'm wondering how much of that is people showed up and Trump and did so well. And we saw that. We saw these candidates kind of drag along with them. I know in Texas, we landed some good blows on Allred as it pertains to his obsession about putting girls in boys' sports.
Right.
And so I'm sure there's some of that. But I was, 14 points for Braun was also unexpected in Indiana, according to the polling. That feels like a polling problem, but maybe it's not.
No, it absolutely is. That's why I began with the conversation about the new methodology. I really believe the days of being able to measure public opinion by calling people on the phone and interrupting them during dinner and getting them to stay on there with you for 20 to 30 minutes are going away. And I mean, Kurt, you heard me say this in 2016. We worked together on Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, and I was worried about it then. And I've become increasingly worried about it. And I've said for a long time that I believe that there would be a new technology that would develop that would replace polling. And I think that's what I saw in what Parscale put together for the Trump campaign. And I think you'll start to see that permeate. Now, that's not going to be, I don't think my industry dies. I think we still will be necessary for the purposes of measuring message testing and building predictive analytics, at least for now, until AI and online conversations can replace that. But as you know, and you guys have made a very successful career out of being able to predict what's going on digitally, the people are very willing to tell you their opinions online and go post it. Now, you always have the one person who says, I won't say anything online about how I feel. Well, you're the exception. And you always have those people who don't answer their phone and talk to us. But those people become far more. And, Kurt, I think back, Kristen, I'll now tell myself a little bit. The first year I did polling was in 1992. And in 1992, I know, last night, in 1992, I worked for Tom Cole's firm in Oklahoma. And for us to do a survey of 300 people, we only needed to pull a sample of 3,000. And those were usually for state house races. I'll tell your listeners a secret. You can't do a poll in a state house race anymore. And those who say they can are just not, they can't. I mean, it's just like if somebody told you, hey, I've got a 30-cent gallon of gas I'll sell you. Something's wrong. And so for us to do a survey in a congressional district, remember I said 3,000 to get 300 people to respond, about 1 in 10. Today, we need over 90,000 people on our list that we can then begin to call to get 300. Now, you can weight that, which means you take one person or 10 people and make them worth 15 people. And there's nothing statistically wrong about that if you have enough of a sample behind it. But it is at best pushing the envelope, and at worst, it is getting sketchy. And I really believe that you're going to find polling in the way that we have done it for the last, since I started in 1992 and going back into since the Dewey Wins famous picture, whenever they changed up the way they were doing survey research, that it's just going to go away. And that's why I think it's really smart what you guys are doing is you're always kind of on the bleeding edge of what's next in the digital industry and in sort of putting together coalitions and what you're doing now with Liberty Spenders. And I think it is the next stage. Whoever figures out what that next stage is, and Parscale may have done it with Eyes Over, and the Trump campaign was certainly the beneficiary of that. And what that leads to, I think, is really going to be fascinating. Again, I think message testing, analytics, those stay the way they are. But the way of just measuring a race, and as you said, Kurt, you gave 2 examples. If you just spend a few minutes on Real Clear Politics, you could give 200 examples of polling that was way off. And think of the 7 swing states. It's really fascinating. I've looked at what Brad had in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, even places like Virginia and New Jersey, where New Jersey was a 5-point race. He had that listed on the last map he sent me as a toss-up. And I'm like, you're insane. There's no way. Wait and see.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. So it's, in fact, I'll tell you, if Jan Seltzer, the world's greatest pollster, and for your listeners who don't follow politics as closely as Kurt and Kristen and I do, that's kind of a said tongue in cheek. She's a pollster out of Iowa that
right.
I would argue is wrong more than she's
poor
right.
Woman.
But she put out she put out a poll the Saturday before the election, the Tuesday election, saying that Kamala Harris was going to win Iowa. And so my phone starts blowing up, and I don't have any numbers from Iowa, but I've done a lot of work in Iowa on presidential campaigns. So people who see me for whatever reason is an expert in Iowa. So I text Brad, say, hey, what do you have Iowa as? He had a 5-point Trump lead. I'm like, all right, send that to me. And I started sending it out to reporters. And if you notice, there's a bunch of people who talk about online, talk to a pollster with experience in Iowa who showed us numbers that Trump has a 5-point lead there. And, there you go. It's just, it was amazing how correct it was.
Yeah, what's interesting about that, I also had people texting me. Mm-hmm. It was mostly my Republican friends, particularly folks outside of politics, in a panic, right? Like, oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, if Trump loses Iowa by 5 points, Kamala Harris is going to get 400 electoral votes. And so there's something really outlier about that, because there's no way he loses Iowa by 5 points and he's not in jeopardy in a state like Indiana, where there's so much common values. And but what I find interesting about Eyes Over, and I had talked to Brad about it, a few weeks back myself, and he was beyond excited about what he's doing there. And my assumption for years has been, the challenge with a tool like Eyes Over is it could be accurate in a presidential campaign because of the sheer volume of communications. Everybody in the country has an opinion on it. And it might be accurate for Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz is a high-profile race in his home state, also nationally. But could it be accurate in the, Jim Banks for Congress race in Indiana's 3rd congressional district, which nobody's talking about on Twitter?
Former, right?
Well, former Congress. Yeah. I mean, now he's soon to be U.S. Senator, but the volume of conversations there isn't.
I think you've got to collect data over a time frame. You can't get it on one night like you can with Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, there's a million conversations. No, it wasn't a million. It was over 100,000 conversations every single day online about the Senate race in Texas. But for congressional race, you can't get it on one day, but you may be able to get it after a week or maybe after 2 weeks. And that I think is the difference. And also, I think there's a little bit of generating conversation. You can use artificial intelligence. There's a lot of technologies that exist now to have a conversation with voters with AI that I think can replace the traditional way of calling people and doing a phone or even an IVR, which means interactive voice recognition, where you get a robo-poll is what it's called, really sort of pejoratively known as. But if you have an artificial intelligence conversation with someone about a race, and then that can happen over a set of time, collect those observations back, and then amalgamate them and utilize artificial intelligence to kind of do what we currently refer to now as weighting, then I think you can achieve that. I wanted to respond to what Kurt said because I think it's an important point. That is the biggest challenge, but I think it's a solvable one.
Yeah.
Well, I needed to give you credit because, you mentioned about polling and analytics, and you have also made that dive of staying on the cutting edge and trying to keep up with technology and what's possible, and have built out a tremendous, tremendous operation. And I was also just going to say for our listeners, I don't think we got into Eyes Over much when we did talk to Brad several weeks back, but you can go back and listen to, we had him on the podcast and he's talking again. He went over some of the stuff from 2016 and since, and talked about how excited he was with some of this new technology and what that was going to allow us to do. So for those of you who have a piqued interest, go back and listen to that. It's a great episode.
He also said influencer marketing was going to prevail in this election and future elections, which he also got right. As both candidates went heavy on influencers. Although I'm shocked to find out that it cost $1 million to obtain Oprah's endorsement for Kamala Harris. I'm curious, but I suspect Trump paid $0. For his influencer appearances.
And what about Kurt? What was the one where they paid $100,000 to build the studio?
Yeah, that was the one that was controversial because it's typically a podcast about sex, and I can't remember. Girls Gone.
Just Call Me Daddy.
Yeah, yes, Call Me Daddy.
Yeah,
but yes, they spent $100,000 to put a set so that Kamala didn't have to fly to.
Unbelievable.
Well, that's what you do when you raise and spend $1 billion more with the bees.
Well, she raised $1 billion. She spent $1 billion and $20 million. Yeah.
And I thought, well, isn't that just indicative too of the type of leadership? She can't even stay within that budget and overspends.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
I thought we
absolutely
were
a deficit spender.
Yeah. I thought we were killing it for Ted Cruz. I think we the year's not over, but we're at $38+ million raised online for Ted in this year, which was significantly more than I projected. And one of the things that I thought we really learned, and is definitely going to go into all my postmortems, and you sort of referenced it in a way, is Ted's investment in getting out into the news media and doing the hard work of branding and getting out to media places to generate the kind of donations that we got. I would love to take credit for 100% of the money he raised, from our email campaigns, our texting campaigns. But at the same time, he made a commitment to essentially do that type of kind of influencer marketing. A lot of it was with traditional media, cable news, Fox News, and others. And that's something we're going to be talking to our clients about. We've kind of lost sight of that with a lot of our campaigns. We've become so dependent on texting and emailing people to no end multiple times a day. In the meantime, our candidates aren't out there pounding the pavement, getting the kind of coverage they need to drive that kind of donation volume.
Well, and I think when you're talking about the split of the ecosystem and conservative media versus legacy or mainstream media, there's just a lot more potential when you're thinking about how do I get my message out there? It doesn't all have to be paid ads. There's so much you can do. Again, this was called the podcast election. There are so many ways to get that message out there and get to the supporters that you need, as we saw evidenced this election.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd like to end this with your advice for Republicans, for Trump. We've just won a big election. We obviously are going to make some, a quick piece of advice might be, well, we've got a mandate to lead. But I'm kind of curious if you were thinking ahead for 3-5 years, maybe even to the next presidential election, saying, what should be Republicans doing to ensure we see another victory? What would you be up to?
Well, I'm going to sound like I'm pandering, but I think one of the things is growing the Patriot economy, the Liberty spender economy. And the reason why that's important is Kerr, you're familiar with Weiland Direct. And for your listeners who don't know, Weiland is a cooperative of lists that actually began serving nonprofits, but it now serves everybody from, Crate and Barrel to Royal Caribbean Cruises. And the idea is they know if they have a list from someone who is buying diapers, they can go tell someone who sells cribs that you should appeal to these people. So just put a pin in that on Weiland. Well, Weiland no longer serves the Patriot economy. It never longer serves nonprofits. They got bought, and they got bought by a firm that doesn't have an interest in that area. So to me, the important aspect of what needs to happen for us to continue to be successful is to begin to stop giving our money to people who hate us. Stop spending money with people who disagree with us. Stop spending money who want to use that money to then come and destroy us. And so using things like Patriot Mobile for your cell phone, using 7 Weeks coffee whenever you, instead of Starbucks, using, I don't know all your clients, will say, Every Life diapers, which I have a 2-year-old that we use because they give money to pro-life causes. And the more that we do that on the conservative side and the Republican side, the more that we learn about who these people are. And you brought up Hispanics. Well, the ability to bring those into the Patriot economy and go and bank them in places that aren't going to cut them off. I got somebody offered to pay me the other day on PayPal. And I'm like, no, I shut down PayPal when they stole the money from the Canadian truckers. And I will never use PayPal again. But I don't know, does there exist a conservative or a Patriot or a Liberty version of PayPal? If so, I download it tomorrow and start using it and make everybody who I have to pay money use it. And so to me, that is the key aspect of what we need to do. And obviously that's self-serving for me because it requires data and it requires a Weiland for the Patriot economy. But I think something like that will ultimately exist. And then the ability to go out and appeal to those people and bring them in. So we're all spending our money and supporting people who like us and want to serve us and aren't out there who don't hate us and hate our values. And to me, that is what we as Republicans should do. And I don't, from a policy standpoint, yes, Trump should do everything he promised. He should shut down the border and cut inflation. Elon Musk should come in and cut spending. But that's all going to happen regardless. To me, what's important is for your listeners, what they can do is make sure that we are growing the Patriot economy and stopping spending our money with people who hate us.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, we've been a little bit at a time finding alternatives. And you mentioned Every Life diapers, same thing for us. Mm-hmm. I have a couple boxes of 7 Weeks coffee upstairs. We interviewed a great coffee company this week. The episode's not come out yet, called Minutemen Coffee. They're based in Texas. They make some really cool kick-ass coffee for conservatives. And, that's a thriving space with a lot of opportunity as well. And so when we're talking to people, there's reasons to do it to make our country great. There's also reasons to do it because there's good money to be made. And I talk to folks about Patriot Mobile all the time. There's such a great example. Mm-hmm. There's no Ryan Reynolds and Patriot Mobile. There's no $1 billion ad budget like I'm sure Verizon, Sprint, all those guys have. But they're a company that's probably built themselves into a 9-figure valuation, just getting good at one thing.
150,000 subscribers.
Yeah, is finding conservatives and Christians who want a conservative Christian wireless provider and doing it quietly under this, behind the scenes. If you would have asked me, and maybe you had, because if you want to have great testimonies to my incompetence, I could have invested early on. In
I think I did ask you, Kurt. If I remember correctly, I came out.
You did. Yeah. Every time I see it, I feel it. But if you would have asked me 10 years ago and said, what would it cost to generate 150,000 subscribers and rival some of these companies out there growing, I would have put a
big number,
a 9-figure sum at least, if not more. And Patriot Mobile's been able to build it on what would probably be a fraction of that budget. So it's a powerful place to be, to make some money. And we talk a lot about our Liberty Spenders group, and it would be crazy if we don't mention it on the show. It's Chris and his colleague Amanda who've helped build out our model of those Liberty Spenders. The 76.5 million people who are the kinds of folks who are buying from Patriot Mobile and Every Life diapers and
who are raising their hand and saying, I will respond. I want to buy from a business that has conservative branding or messaging or Christian branding and messaging. And again, we have that full breakdown. And so for listeners, I appreciate what you said, Chris, but ultimately this just comes down to everybody. If you're in business, you're trying to make an impact. You're trying to offer a product or service that adds value in the marketplace. That's how we all do business and survive, is by adding value. And so to your point about how do we see the success, and if you're a business owner, how do you respond to this? It's just don't be afraid. Recognize the opportunity. Recognize that people are searching for alternatives and that there has been a response to how these large corporations have responded and treated us. And I do think that has played into ultimately the sentiment that's been growing for so long of just recognizing that these companies have just taken their eye off. How do I just provide a good product or service instead of shoving, my agenda down your throats? And so many things. And people they are not looking for that. And so for us to respond, we can be that alternative. We can serve these people with grace, humility, with excellent customer service, and help, again, grow this economy and not be so reliant on alternatives, again, which they're hostile to our values. We just don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah. I am excited that we had you on, Chris. Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it. It's great to see you guys.
Yeah, it is.
Really grateful to you because you're a hot commodity. And so we're really blessed to get your mind and your analysis on this. This is a real treat.
Yeah.
Oh, you're two of my favorite people in the world. So I'll any chance to hang out with you guys, even if it's here online, then I'll take it any day.
Well, awesome. Well, anybody who's listening, thank you for tuning in. If you liked what you heard today, please click like or subscribe. And if you want to learn more about what we're doing with Liberty Spenders, check us out at libertyspenders.com. If you want to read our new book about Liberty Spenders, there's a link there where you can get a free copy. We'd love to talk to you. So thanks, everybody. Until next time.